The lemonade in Casey's hand began to sweat, unnoticed, as the faint sound rolled over the spring air. It was low at first, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the celebration. Then it grew louder. Rhythmic. Heavy. Not thunder. Not wind. Something else. Something mechanical and purposeful, cutting across the soft notes of music and children's laughter like a memory sharpened into sound. At first, a few people turned their heads, confused. One of the teachers paused mid-sentence as her students pointed toward the horizon. The cotton candy vendor shaded his eyes. Then the sky split open. 3 helicopters, massive, dark, and deliberate, came into view above the school grounds. Their formation was exact, their movement slow and controlled. The middle one, larger than the rest, cast a white shadow over the soccer field. Its twin rotors throbbed through the air, commanding attention without needing to ask for it. The crowd began to stir. Conversations halted mid-laugh. Children dropped their toys. One girl released a helium balloon that floated upward, unnoticed by its owner, as every eye turned to the sky. A boy near the bounce house started to cry. His mother pulled him close without taking her eyes off the descending aircraft. It was the Chinook that descended, its wide belly slowly lowering toward the open grass behind the playground. The field, freshly lined for a weekend game, now became something sacred. The thrum of the rotors rattled picnic tables, sent paper cups tumbling, and bent the flags along the fence to sharp angles. Casey stood still, her breath caught in her chest. She instinctively stepped in front of her daughter Harper, her free hand resting on the child's shoulder. The old man beside her, who had said little since accepting her quiet offer of food and company, looked up without blinking. His face, until then clouded by years of silence, seemed to settle. Not surprised. Not afraid. Just ready. The Chinook hovered briefly, then touched down with a weight that seemed to press the moment into the earth. Dust billowed across the field. People shielded their faces. A few parents stepped back protectively, uncertain whether to interpret this as danger or ceremony. Teachers huddled together, trying to maintain calm in the midst of growing tension. Then, like a scene rehearsed in another lifetime, the back hatch lowered and 6 soldiers stepped out in sequence. Their uniforms bore insignia not easily recognized by the average civilian. They moved without hesitation, eyes scanning, not for threat, but for one specific person. Each footfall across the field was measured, silent in the din of the still-turning rotors. They didn't pause at the edge of the playground. They didn't look at the crowd. They walked directly toward the man seated beside Casey. He saw them coming. Slowly, he rose. At first, his movements were that of any older man, careful, stiff, restrained by age. But then something shifted. His back straightened, not from pride, but from memory. His heels aligned without conscious thought. His hand brushed his shirt pocket, as if confirming the presence of something important. He stood as if being pulled into form by something deeper than discipline, something like purpose. The children quieted. One by one, they began to sense that this wasn't a performance. This wasn't for show. Even the younger ones, usually oblivious to adult tension, fell into an uncertain hush. Some clung to their parents' legs. Others simply watched, eyes wide, absorbing a lesson no textbook would ever teach. The soldiers reached the table. The officer at the front stopped 3 feet from the old man. A tall figure with sun-darkened skin, he removed his cap and held it to his chest. The man who had eaten quietly beside Casey, whose presence had made others recoil only an hour earlier, looked him in the eye. And the officer saluted. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a moment of recognition so complete, so heavy with meaning, that it reshaped the air around it. The man returned the salute, not crisply, not as he might have 20 years ago, but with dignity. His arm trembled slightly, but the gesture held steady. Casey felt her eyes blur. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew what it meant. Her daughter stared upward, clutching Casey's hand tightly. One of the soldiers stepped forward and whispered something to the officer. He nodded, then turned to the crowd. But no words came yet. They weren't needed. Not yet. A silence fell so profound it seemed to muffle even the still whirring blades behind them. A woman near the refreshment tent dropped her phone. No one moved to pick it up. The man, this stranger who had been mocked just an hour earlier, stood at the center of a gathering he had not asked for, surrounded by people who had once turned away. Now, they watched. Not because they were told to, but because something inside them had shifted, too. The sound that had first arrived like a storm had brought with it something deeper than awe. It had brought the weight of truth. And that truth now stood quietly in the schoolyard, wearing old clothes, holding a military pendant in his hand, and returning a salute meant for heroes. The air held its breath. Even after the helicopter rotors slowed and stopped, the quiet remained, as if the sky itself didn't dare speak over what was happening. The officer facing the crowd stepped forward now. His posture was solemn but certain, like someone carrying news across generations. "This man," he said, his voice calm and steady, "is Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Mills." The name rippled across the field like wind brushing tall grass, recognizable to no one in that moment, and yet sacred all the same. A few adults furrowed their brows, unsure why a military officer would stand among balloons and lemonade, invoking a name that rang no bell. But the old man, Jackson, had not moved. He kept his eyes on the officer, still holding the pendant gently in his hand. For over 12 years, the officer continued, this country believed him to be missing in action. Presumed dead. A murmur moved through the onlookers. A few gasped aloud. A child asked, too loudly, how can someone be dead and here? But no one hushed him. He led an elite operations unit during a covert mission known only as Riptide. The details remain classified. But what I can tell you is this, when contact was lost and his unit scattered, no body was ever recovered. Only fragments. Reports were inconclusive. For a long time, we believed we had buried a hero in name only. Casey felt her knees weaken slightly. She glanced at Jackson. He wasn't proud. He wasn't basking. His face bore the same quiet weariness, only now there was a stillness in his eyes, a kind of release. A man stepping out of his own shadow. A teacher whispered to a colleague, I remember reading about that operation in a newsletter years ago. It was a big deal, no one ever found the unit commander. A woman in the crowd, previously filming with her phone, now lowered it slowly. She seemed suddenly ashamed to be holding it. We never stopped looking, the officer said. But the world is loud. Names get lost. Faces blur. Until someone decides to see. He turned toward Casey then. Not smiling. Just acknowledging. It was this photograph, he continued, pulling out a printed image from a file one of the soldiers held, circulated by accident in a local parents group, meant to mock, to shame, that reached a veteran on the other side of the country. The picture was passed around. Casey recognized it immediately. It showed her, mid-conversation with Jackson, a sandwich on the table and Harper sipping lemonade nearby. She remembered the moment it was taken. She remembered how the woman beside the snack cart had scoffed, nudging another parent. How they'd laughed and shared it with a caption that barely masked its cruelty. It had been meant to embarrass. It had, instead, revealed. That veteran, the officer said, recognized Colonel Mills instantly. He'd served under him. He reported it to his chapter leader. Within an hour, it was confirmed. We scrambled this unit the moment we had a fix on his location. Someone in the crowd clapped once. Then stopped, unsure. The officer stepped back. The others now surrounded Jackson, not encircling, but escorting. One placed a folded flag into his hands. Another pinned a replacement insignia to his shirt, Freedom Squadron, Operation Riptide. Not the original, but newly cast, its edges gleaming. Jackson didn't speak. He didn't need to. Before leaving, he turned toward Casey. His hand opened, revealing a small eagle-shaped token, brass, old, worn smooth in places where fingers had passed over it countless times. A coin, maybe. Or a keepsake. He bent slightly, and with hands steadier than expected, offered it to Harper. The little girl looked at her mother. Casey nodded once. Harper reached out and took the token, her small hand curling over it gently. The crowd watched in complete stillness. Then Jackson nodded to Casey, not a thank you, but something deeper. Something that said he had been seen, and that it had mattered. He turned and walked toward the helicopters, flanked by soldiers, his frame smaller than the story now unfolding behind him. No music played. No speech was given. But when the Chinook lifted off moments later, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a restoration. In the crowd, a father gently pulled his son closer. A woman who had sneered earlier now wiped her cheek quickly, hoping no one noticed. A teacher gathered her class, quieter than usual. And Casey remained in place, her daughter by her side, holding the coin like it was a secret passed through generations. Not one camera flashed. But no one would forget. The following morning, the schoolyard was unusually quiet. The streamers and balloons from the celebration had been taken down, and the scent of cotton candy had vanished into the night. But something lingered. Not the spectacle of helicopters or soldiers, but the memory of what dignity looked like when the world finally paused to acknowledge it. Near the edge of the playground, where the lemonade stand had stood the day before, a new bench had been installed. It hadn't been there at dismissal. Now it stood clean and level, placed beneath the large maple tree that cast shade over the corner of the yard. There was a plaque on it. Bronze. Subtle. No fanfare in the font. It read, "Here sat a man the world forgot, until someone chose to see him." By noon, word had spread. Some parents came to pick up their children early, citing vague reasons, but really, they just wanted to walk by that bench. They wanted to stand there for a moment. They wanted to understand what had happened. And perhaps, they wanted to believe that they might have acted differently. Inside the school, something had shifted too. Teachers altered their lesson plans. Instead of fractions and geography, they spoke gently about empathy, about how not every wound is visible, and how the people we pass by might be carrying stories heavier than we'll ever know. One teacher brought in a local veteran to speak about service. Not about war, not about tactics, but about what it means to come home and feel like the world has no place for you anymore. Students asked thoughtful questions. Not about medals, but about loneliness, about honor, about regret. Even the youngest began to sense it, that being kind isn't about being nice, it's about being brave. Some parents apologized, not to Casey, exactly, but in the way they corrected their children more softly, or the way they paused before making a joke, remembering the weight of their words. They didn't speak openly of the photo shared in mockery, but no one brought it up again. The post had been deleted. The woman who had taken it stopped attending school events for a while. At the front office, a man in a gray suit delivered an envelope to the school administrator. It contained no return address. Inside was a handwritten note, a folded military commendation, and a check made out to the Maple Ridge Elementary Compassion Fund for children in need of shoes, lunch money, or a safe place to wait before school began. The name on the check was scratched out, but the initials JM were clear enough. The token, small and eagle-shaped, remained in Harper's room. She kept it on her desk, next to her crayons and spelling cards. She didn't fully understand its meaning, but she understood how it made her feel. It made her think about the man who sat quietly, who gave her the coin with a steady hand and kind eyes. She told her teacher she wanted to write about him for her class project. Casey never gave interviews. The media tried. Emails came. A local news crew even waited outside the school once, hoping to catch her between classes. She said nothing. Because it was never about her. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. Not in her mind. She had simply seen a man who was hungry and alone. She had offered a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a place in the shade. She had taught her daughter, without a single word, that no one is beneath kindness. But the world noticed. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't. And what had beg asterisk in as a single act of quiet empathy rippled outward, changing how a community saw itself. People began to carry granola bars in their cars. A local diner added a veteran's meal to their menu, no cost, no questions asked. A sixth grader organized a fundraiser to buy sleeping bags for the homeless. The school board began reviewing how children with financial hardship were supported. Not because they were forced to, but because they were ready to see. The bench remained. Every spring, its brass plaque was polished before the celebration. No one sat on it during events. Not because it was forbidden, but because it felt like something sacred. A reminder carved in metal that the most important moments in life often go unnoticed while they are happening. Years later, Harper would still walk past it and run her fingers along the smooth letters. She would tell her younger brother, when he asked what it meant, that's where someone remembered who they were. And that was enough. It always was. Kindness without question is enough.